Hello, Cardinal Nation. Welcome to the fifth episode of the St. Louis Cardinals Unrestricted podcast. This is your host, Christian May Suzuki, and today it's a bit of a sad day because it's the day after Albert Pujols was released by the Angels. And while he's not indicating it, this could theoretically signal an end to his career. Now, that would obviously be pretty unfortunate, but it has been coming in a sense. He's hitting 240, 289, 405 over the past 5 seasons, which just won't cut it really at any level. And then this year, he was hitting 198 with a 622 OPS. He just doesn't have the pop anymore, and now he can't really hit the ball either. So it's definitely tough, and it seems like the writing was on the wall. An Angels writer recently wrote about the move and said that part of the reason that this move happened was there's a clear-cut replacement for him now for really apparently the first time, which is somewhat surprising considering how old he is and considering that you probably should be planning for a successor to your 37, 38, 39, 40-year-old first baseman at some point. But hey, I guess they decided to delay, and maybe that's why the Angels just haven't been able to put it together. It just seems pretty ridiculous that now is the time that they finally have a first baseman that can hit better than 700 OPS, can hit over 240, 250. So, it's frustrating to see that he didn't really have much success over in the Angels, but part of it may have been him, but a lot of it is on the Angels, as we can see. They just haven't really been prepared for anything, and it's come to make it look like the Pujols move in retrospect was just a waste of time for them, really. So the question is, where does he go now? The Cardinals have obviously been a pretty big name with the history behind it. But they've insisted, well, they haven't insisted, but it just doesn't seem like there is much of a fit for him here. If he were to take a bench role, that would obviously be fine. We could work with him in a lesser role, or even someone who would just take a one-day contract and retire. That would be my preference. That would be great for the Cardinals. It would be great for baseball. I think that it is about time that Albert Pujols retires, but it doesn't seem like he's going to go that way. He's not going to sign a one-day and retire, and Ken Rosenthal came out with a story on The Athletic basically saying that he didn't want to accept a bench role since 2017, and that was part of what led to his release. So it's pretty clear that unless he starts, he's not going to be particularly happy. And right now, Paul Goldschmidt is starting at first base, so that's just not an option. We can't really put him anywhere else either. And at the end of the day, Matt Carpenter can, albeit very limitedly, but he can play second base. And right now, that's way more valuable to the Cardinals off the bench than someone who can barely play first base. So, now, with the Cardinals out of the way, where could Albert Pujols go? There isn't really a great deal of options. The first one being the La Russa and the White Sox connection. They just lost another bench bat, so they do have a need for a DH or someone who can provide them consistent at-bats off the bench. And obviously the La Russa connection makes it seem relatively ideal for Albert to come back and sort of enjoy the last part of his career with someone that raised him, or not raised him, but who really was with him every step of the way during his incredible Cardinal run. And then, of course, there's the Royals with Mike Matheny, the classic Kansas City. He can be back home or close to home and close to St. Louis as well. And the Royals really do need some help. They have Ryan O'Hearn at DH right now, and he has a 627 OPS. So really not that much better than what Albert is doing. So simply off of the name appeal alone and off of the experience and what he can bring to a team based on everything that he's learned and as a veteran presence, if he's also hitting a little bit better than the next guy up too, then that's just another bonus. Now, those are two kind of obvious choices with the connections and the obviously opening roster spots, but I think there are two others that there is a potential for him to join. It's obviously a bit of a long shot, but the Yankees have been in disarray at first base since Jay Bruce retired. Right now, they're trotting out Mike Ford, who is hitting 91. Yes, you heard me right. Not a $1.91, just 91 cents, and a 484 OPS. As bad as Pujols is doing, that is exceptionally worse, remarkably bad. And the Yankees also don't particularly care about money. They don't particularly care about wasting that kind of roster spot or anything like that. Albert would get to stay in a big city. He would have that appeal where, hey, it's Albert Pujols. It's not just a random guy. It's a Hall of Famer that's closing out his career in New York. And that would itself bring attention to the Yankees that have, quite frankly, not gotten it for a while. And as we all know, really do enjoy it. And another team that has an opening in his role or in his spot would be Seattle. They have Ty France at DH, who can play first, who's hitting pretty well. But they also have Evan White actually playing first right now, who's hitting 141 with a 408 OPS. And, obviously Seattle's a pitcher's park and is probably the most pitcherist of pitcher's parks in the entire league. But a power bat with a 408 OPS is really, really detrimental to a team. So there is a chance that a team like Seattle, the location is not as great, optimal for Pujols. It's not as big a city. It's not somewhere where he has a lot of connection or anything like that. So this is probably the longest shot on my list. But they do have a spot for him. And if the other teams won't come knocking and Seattle does, then I don't see why he wouldn't do it. So with those four teams out of the way, the big talk, well, the other option that he's not going to take, but the talk could be if he doesn't get signed by a team or if teams simply don't want him, does he retire? And I personally think he should retire, as I've said. And quite frankly, I think he should have retired after 2019. It's hard to really talk about it because I was an advocate of the 300 batting average and how important it was to a legacy of a GOAT or of someone who we're talking about as one of the greatest players ever. When you're really splitting hairs at the very top of the ladder, the difference between 300 and 299, or in Albert's case now 298, it's the same thing as the difference between 399 and 400 home runs. It's the same thing as the difference between a 1480 SAT score and a 1500 SAT score. The visual aspect and the idea that you got over that particular hump, that particular milestone, that even number is important. And when you look at Pujols' numbers after 2019, he stayed above 300 batting average. He still had over 650 home runs, still had over 3,000 hits, and still had over 2,000 RPIs. He hit all the benchmarkers that you would need to hit when you're talking about a Hall of Fame career, when you're talking about one of the greatest players of all time. And then he brought his average down by 2 points, and his OPS down by 6 points in just 2 years. And that is detrimental. Those things hurt when you're talking about the bottom line and you're talking about who the GOAT is and who the greatest ever is. And when you're putting your best of all time lists together, those are things that will be remembered, that are important. Now, the argument is that him getting to 700 home runs at that point was still reasonable. He was only, like I said, he was over 650 home runs after 2019, so he was less than 50 away. And he had hit 20-plus home runs. He had averaged 22 home runs over the past 3 seasons prior to that. So there was a chance that he could make it through, and he could get the home runs that he needed to break the 700 mark and really be that guy among the best of all time. And sure, if that was reasonable, then that would have been great. Unfortunately, we'll never really know for sure because COVID shortened the season and essentially screwed him over. But he did hit 23 home runs in 2019, yet his slugging was barely over 400 and had barely over 400 for the past 3 seasons. So even though he was hitting a lot of home runs, it was pretty obvious that his power just was not there anymore. And that's just unfortunate. So I think that it's just not going to be able to happen at this point, him getting to 700 home runs. And I'm not sure if it was ever particularly reasonable. There was only a matter of time before he really fell off a cliff. It had been obvious that the power and the bat speed and the ability to hit was just falling off. And the fact that he had the number of home runs that he did was a simple testament to his greatness, and simply just it just shows how incredible Albert Pujols really is, because it really is hard to describe to people nowadays what Albert Pujols was. You see all the hype over Mike Trout and the glorification of him as one of the greatest of all time. But when you really put the numbers side by side between Albert's time in St. Louis and Trout's time in Los Angeles and Trout's career as a whole, Albert Pujols has probably had the better start offensively and also has a couple rings on top of it. So, I don't have to tell you guys because obviously Cardinal fans know this, but Albert Pujols is arguably the greatest player of our generation. And, he probably is, to be quite frank. There are guys who would say that someone like Barry Bonds or guys like that, but maybe it's my personal bias, maybe it's the steroid thing, maybe it's the fact that he has been as good for as long and remained clean. But, for me, Albert Pujols is the best hitter of our generation, of my generation, whatever you want to call that, early to mid 2000s generation. And I know that's a bold claim, and I know there are a lot of guys who put together some incredible numbers during that period. It was the height of the hitters era. But what Albert Pujols did over his first 10, 11 seasons is something that will be very difficult to be replicated. And, Mike Trout has done a good job and he's gotten close. But the fact that he has been considered essentially one of the greatest players of all time for doing that, and then also playing decent defense, I think the defensive end of Mike Trout has been a little bit overblown over the past couple of years, but that's a topic for another day. But the fact is, the numbers say that he is a average to above average defender, and pairing that with Albert Pujols' numbers has essentially launched him into the GOAT conversation. So that's just a testament to how impressive Albert Pujols was. And with Albert Pujols' impressive nature and just the incredible stuff that he did for us, there are obviously some big moments that he had with the Cardinals, and it's hard to lower them or thin them down to 5. So I did my best, but I have 6 here. So I guess I'll give my honorable mention, or my tie at the bottom, were the big milestones that he hit. He hit 2,000 hits. Unfortunately, not 3,000 hits, but he hit 2,000 hits in 2011 against the Cubs. And then he also hit 400 home runs with us as well. Now, the situations in the games that these moments were in really limit how impactful they were. But the fact remains these are still big milestones and big accomplishments that he had for the Cardinals. And of course, the reception was great. The moment itself was beautiful, and Cardinal Nation did a great job paying respect to Albert during that time. And the fact that both were at home was great. I guess number 4 on my list is Albert's best regular season game, you would argue, or I would argue. His best regular season game came on July 20th, 2004. And it wasn't necessarily the largest game when you're talking about playoff ramifications, but it did put the Cardinals 9.5 games in the lead in the NL Central, which was only at 3 on July 4th, so 16 days prior. And many historians, critics, etc. believe that game was what capped off the Cardinals' playoff run, or what capped off the Cardinals' regular season run and secured their playoff spot in 2004. So Albert that game was 5 of 5, had 3 homers and 4 runs scored, 5 rubies, and one of the home runs he hit was a 2-run homer to break the tie in the 9th and essentially seal the game for the Cardinals. 2004 was probably the best Cardinal team ever to not win a ring. And it was impressive to see that Albert Pujols was a catalyst to put that team on top with all the different incredible weapons and incredible hitters, multiple Hall of Famers that were on that squad. Now, the third moment is the home run off of Verlander in Game 1 of the 2006 World Series. I'm sure everyone, myself included, most Cardinal fans watching there at that time remember that moment. Remember when he came up to the plate, thinking that they should have walked him, and then being very, very glad that they didn't. That home run brought the lead up from 2-1 to 4-1 in Game 1 of 2006, and really set the tone and set the stage for a really, really rough series for Tiger pitchers. And obviously it led to the first World Series in 20 plus years, and it was a great moment, and it was an important one in Cardinals history, and that's why it gets this number 3 spot. For the number 2 spot, we have another World Series game, or another World Series performance, and that's just generally the 2011 World Series that he had. In particular, 2 moments. The Game 6, obviously, where he had the hit with 1 out in the 9th to really get things started there. And then he had the 3 home run game as well, which was obviously exciting. And albeit some of those home runs weren't needed, but it was an exciting game and exciting moment. And of course, it led to another World Series by the St. Louis Cardinals. So it's obviously a big moment in history, and it's something that a lot of Cardinal fans will forever remember. And then finally, number 1, I think you know where we're going with this. I didn't leave this one off, of course, but number 1 is the moon shot her around the world, the ball that landed on the moon, the ball that still hasn't landed in many eyes, and that is the home run off of Brad Lidge. Down to their last out to cement such a moment was incredible. It obviously, I don't need to retell the story. It sucked the life out of that building. And it sucked the life out of Billy Wagner's career for multiple years, which is just incredible. It's unfortunate to see that happen, but that's just Pujols' aura. That was what Pujols did. That was how good he was and how powerful that he was. And I will remember him, no matter how his career ends, I will forever remember him in that light. And it's a real shame to see, the way that his career has winded down and the struggles that he's had really getting things together with the Angels. I mean, it's hard seeing your favorite players sort of lose face and lose what you feel is that they're playing dignity. Their last moments aren't ones that you would remember them by. They're a shadow of their former selves, and it sucks. It's frustrating. But if Albert Pujols loves playing the game of baseball, which I know he does, and he continues to love it, then as long as someone is willing to pay him and willing to give him a chance, then who are we to say otherwise? It might be selfish of me as a fan to want him to preserve these numbers, but you know what? It's a selfishness that I'll acknowledge and that I will unfortunately not be ashamed of. I do wish that Albert Pujols retired in 2019, and I do think that he should retire now. But I will always remember Albert Pujols in a Cardinals jersey and for what he was in a Cardinals jersey. And I will always be thankful for that. So anyway, thank you so much for listening to this episode. Apologies for the delay. There were a couple of things that came up on my life, and obviously the Albert Pujols news made me have to change gears quite a bit. But we will continue on with the regulars schedule starting on Monday. So thank you so much for listening, and hope to see you again next week. Go Cardinals.